Thanks for having me here, everybody. I really appreciate the chance to talk. I'm going to tell one story before we start, just because sometimes you got to prime the pump a little bit, then you guys can fire away at whatever you want to talk about. Sometimes you come into one of these, you think the first thing you do is you tell a war story. But I don't like to tell war stories because they're dangerous. They say the only thing that ruins a good war story is an eyewitness. So, I thought I'd tell a political story. And because we were involved in politics, because war is an extension of politics, by other means, as Clausewitz said. But we went and had elections in Afghanistan in August of 2009. They're very difficult elections. In fact, they were difficult. There were a lot of allegations of fraud and different things like that, difficult to secure. But the security part went well, and the other parts, a lot of controversy. But you know, sometimes people see things differently. And I took Senator Levin, Carl Levin came over. We went down to a very difficult area in the Helmand River Valley, and we got in a room about half the size of this one, with about 4 times as many people as in this room now. Everybody's sitting on the floor, got big guys with beards, turbans, and everything like that, but very friendly. We started talking about it. At one point, Senator Levin goes, well, you know, you had this election, and the feedback is everyone in this village voted for the same person, President Karzai. And he goes, I don't think that's democracy. They translated that for a moment, and they all kind of looked at each other. And I think, okay, we're dead. But they're way too polite, too respectful for that. And one of them said, listen, if you want to know whether it's raining, look on your own window. I kind of didn't get that. But then he said, listen, we got together and we talked about it. We all talked it out, and we decided that why would we split our vote? We would sort among ourselves who we're going to vote for, and then we would vote. In that case, they chose President Karzai. And it was a fascinating moment, because in reality, you could see all of us, to include Senator Levin, going, in reality, there's an awful lot of democracy in that, because they had worked it out amongst themselves, figured it out. The key thing is not that their system is a better system than ours or anything. The system is, if you stop and you ask and you think about it, sometimes it's not quite what it seems. And sometimes people work things out in a way that makes sense to them and works pretty well. And before we suddenly throw rocks at them and go, oh, they don't get it, we ought to stop and make sure we understand exactly what's under it when you peel it back a little bit. Okay, that's my only political story. That's as political as I'll get today. Fire away. Please. Easy questions only. Ma'am.
Thank you, General. I teach political science compared to politics here at Widener. Going off the political aspect of things, I wanted to ask you about some of the coordinating activities between the American forces and the British forces in particular. A former student of mine, not from Widener, was in charge of working with the British and dealing out money for hospitals and schools, I believe. And so I wanted to ask about how does one go about coordinating those activities, and what kind of a pain in the neck can it be, and is it truly useful? Does it actually promote development in every aspect?
Yeah, that's a great question. Let me start first on 2 levels. One, there's the military side, and then there's the rest of government side. They're not distinct. They have to be put together. On the military side, it works pretty cleanly. I commanded ISAF. The British forces worked for me. You know, you got a real good structure and robust staffs to do that. When you start to talk about all of the other parts of development, governance, and helping the legal system and whatnot, you bring in a number of civilian experts from the British government, the American government, and some other agencies as well. And right now we have a number of things called PRTs, Provincial Reconstruction Teams, which are geographically based. They suffer a little bit from unity of command and unity of effort, because in many cases you put together an ad hoc team that comes for a period, and it's difficult for them to work effectively as a team procedurally. Then they go back up to their own lines of resources, funding, and whatnot, and it makes it difficult for them, the young people, typically not old enough, to come forward to fully speak and represent their organization and deliver that. Then, of course, the governance and development are also really hard anyway. And so when you're trying to create governance in an area, you've got multiple, we had 46 countries in our coalition, and some of the PRTs or areas, you had the country that was dominant in providing support absolutely directing what they wanted that element to do. But if you've got 46 different elements around the country, you can get some pretty different outcomes. And then there's the other danger if you've got a central government of the government of Afghanistan. Very naturally, on the one hand, they appreciate the help to develop local government. On the other hand, everything you do that goes directly to a local level, while it may be efficient, also weakens the central government. Because they don't, if they don't control the money, or they don't control the decisions, or they don't control even the training of people, then they don't have the same level of legitimacy. And they also don't exercise the muscles that it takes to get better. So we had this paradox there. On the one hand, it's more efficient to do it one way. On the other hand, you're not trying to be more efficient. At the end of the day, you're trying to get the whole thing done. It's not efficient to raise a kid through teenagerdom. You know, I raised a son, and I wish I'd locked him in the closet from age 13 to 20. But now he's out, he's doing great. But I mean, that's just kind of the way it is. And I should have got some students riled up with my last comment. Somebody, take a shot, throw a shoe. Ma'am.
My name is Stephanie Sheffield. I'm a French professor here at Widener.
I'd like to ask, I believe that the model of warfare that you espouse is not just about physical confrontation. And with all the ROTC students in the room, I'm curious about what kind of training you think they need beyond just physical preparation, and what kind of training their professors can help give them that would prepare them for what they're going to face in the field.
Great, thanks. First, language. I took Spanish for 8 years and then never served in an area that was any value to me. But that's where we thought we were going to go. I would tell you language. Learn your own language well first, but language training. We spent a tremendous amount of time, an incredible amount of effort, inefficiently because we didn't know what we were talking about. And if you don't speak the language, it's kind of hard to engage people at a level that you really understand. The other thing is understand the history in an area you're trying to do something with. We sometimes want to go in an area and we want to apply a fairly simplistic response because that's what we know. It's not that we have bad intentions or bad people or stupid, you just don't know. If you don't know something, why something's a certain way, when you go to fix it, you can be sadly disappointed with the outcome. Now the military, unfortunately, because we're the military, has to be very well trained in fighting combat arms activities. And so you train, and that has the danger of becoming a hammer. For a person with a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And so you are hardwired to do that. Now our forces have done really well in the last 5 or 6 years in transforming, and you'll be surprised how well young people out there will sit there and explain it to you. They'll say, sir, it ain't about killing people. It's about convincing the people that this is what needs to happen. I used to do something called counterinsurgency math with people. And I'd get them in, with troops and whatnot, I'd get them in the room and I'd say, if you got 10 insurgents and you killed 2, how many do you got? And of course the SEALs have got to take their, boots off so they got but you know, obviously the easy answer is 8, it's never right. Because if you have an area where you have 10 insurgents and you kill 2, if you're lucky, you're down to 2 or 3 because the rest see the error of their ways and quit. More often, the 2 you kill are brothers, mothers, fathers, sons, somebody. And somebody, even in a place like Afghanistan or Iraq as well, even if they didn't really approve of what their loved one or friend was doing, it still becomes a little bit of a blood feud. It becomes a little bit, well, I know he should have been doing that, but they killed him. And then suddenly, you got a bigger problem. You got 16 insurgents. And suddenly the war's not about the political, underlying cause for the insurgency. It's about something else. And then you got a real challenge. So it's learning to understand, and the language is the one that I think it should be required for every, at least officer and NCO in the Army to have a second language. Sir.
I'm a social work student here at Widener. I have a question. I would like to have a clear information about the mission of the U.S. service in Afghanistan. And actually a question because we believe here in the States, and many people, that we try to change the culture right there. And people think that we're trying to be like a giant trying to change something that we really don't work. Can you have some comments about that?
Sure. First off, we've had a number of missions in Afghanistan, and we as a nation and we as an international community have struggled with what our purpose there is. Let's rewind the clock just a little bit to 1979. December of 1979, I'm a young Special Forces officer in 7th Group, and the Soviets intervened in Afghanistan. And we think, okay, here we go. We are likely to fight the Soviets. Instead of us directly fighting them, the Afghan Mujahideen fought them with assistance provided through Pakistan by the United States and other elements. So for 10 years, the Afghans fought against the Soviets. And they ultimately forced the Soviets to leave, and which was a pretty embarrassing defeat for the Soviets. It was pretty important. So at that point, our purpose, I would argue, was to push back Soviet Cold War encroachment. Then we essentially turned our attention away from Afghanistan from 1990 until 2001. Now, in the fall of 2001, some people say, well, we went to Afghanistan because the Afghans helped us, asked us to. That's not true. We went to Afghanistan after 9/11 because it was in our interest to go. Al-Qaeda was enjoying the refuge and support of a Taliban-dominated government. And so Al-Qaeda had the ability to operate from Afghanistan, and in fact, what had happened is Afghanistan had become a location of training camps, and many of the former Mujahideen had become extremists who were starting to export violence around the region, not just in Afghanistan. So we went to Afghanistan for our interests, for our purposes in the fall of 2001. And when we did that, we partnered with some of the Afghans who were opposing the Taliban. We overthrew the Taliban government and pushed Al-Qaeda out. And then at that point, you have a decision to make. Do we have any responsibility for the government or for the people of Afghanistan? And do we have any interest in trying to shape the future of Afghanistan? At that point, the decision, as I understood it, and I was there, started in 2002, was yes to both. The first mission was to keep Al-Qaeda out, prevent it from becoming a safe haven. The second mission was to help craft a durable enough Afghanistan with a government, enough security forces, and enough of an economic future so that they could take their place in the world. Not to change their culture, not anything else. Over the subsequent decade now, that mission's been difficult to keep exactly clear. And the reason it's difficult to keep clear is because it's hard. As you try to create a durable Afghanistan that is under an increasing insurgency, then you say, well, you still want an Afghanistan that can survive and be an Afghanistan that doesn't oppress half its population, the women. And then suddenly you say, okay, we've got to help them. And that becomes a greater and greater requirement because it grows. And that's a tough one. In terms of changing culture, there are people who probably would like to change parts of the culture, but I think that would be, you do that at your peril. Changing culture of a country or a people is something like changing the direction in which a river flows. You're going to have a tough time making it go at 90 degrees. And you're certainly not going to get it to go in the other direction. So I think you've got to respect that. But at the same time, there are things that you do try to work with them, because Afghanistan doesn't have a single culture. Like most countries, it's got different opinions around the country and different ways they want to go. So I think what we've got to do is help them shape it. It's delicate business. It's hard to do that. Sir?
Yeah. I'm Hal Torrey. I teach leadership here at Director of Organizational Development Services. And you just mentioned this question, but in 2002, I went and saw a leadership speaker who had written a book, I can't set my scores, forgive me, saying that it would be impossible to have democracies take hold in the Arab countries, Middle East, Muslim countries, and other, without an educated female electorate. So you just mentioned this, so I'd like to hear you speak on whether you think that we can lead without engaging the female population.
Yeah, I mean, technically, could you have one? I don't know. You could have some kind of a democracy without female participation, but I think it would be sort of half a loaf. And so I think that whatever happens in the region needs to include that half of the population directly. I mean, they're indirectly involved. In Afghanistan, the women are really, really strong. Also, in Afghanistan, in the government of Afghanistan, 25%, a little over 25% of the parliament is women. How much in our Congress? It isn't 25%, it's 16%. Now, they've mandated in law, so I mean, that's a good thing moving forward. I guess what we can do is we can encourage, what we have to be careful about doing is coming in and saying, no, this is what you gotta do. Because it gets back to understanding. Sometimes we say, nope, you gotta do this, and you don't understand why they do it, and you don't understand the connecting threads to a culture, and suddenly you get second, third order effects you're just not aware of. I think things change in areas, culturally, over time. I think things like information technology, there's a lot of cell phones and internet in Afghanistan, get shaped that way. But we can't turn the river 90 degrees. Even if we feel passionately about it, we got to be very humble in what we think we do culturally. One, because you can't do it, and two, because people resent it. And then they don't want to hear the basic things that, you know, interested you.
I'm Elizabeth Donofrio. I'm a student here at Widener in the Society MBA program. I'm also part of the New Jersey National Guard, serving as a recon platoon leader for the 50th Chemical.
Great.
So my question to you is about young leadership. What would be your advice to a young leader in today's war as far as what they need to prepare not only themselves for, but the people that they're commanding?
That's great. I think the first thing you got to do is probably been true in all wars and all, even peacetime. You have to care. You can't fake it. The second thing is you got to do the basic things of leadership. You've got to be the leader you want to follow. So you've got to act with the personal self-discipline and the values that are important. The biggest thing that gets a leader in trouble is when they advertise one kind of values and performance and they are something different. And they try to convince you that they're one and they're not. And it kills everybody, because even if, I mean, if you're not that, don't say that. Say this, but I'm doing my best. Soldiers will actually follow that. They'll make up for your allowances, or they'll allow you a great amount. In today's world, one of the things I would do is avoid the risk of oversimplifying. You know, again, people will sometimes, I don't know how many times I've heard people say the only thing Iraqis understand is force. The only thing Afghans understand is force, or equally equivalent simple explanations. And it's tempting to simplify because you just paint something black or paint something white and go for it. But your soldiers will understand it's not. They will very quickly understand it's gray. They live in it. And so you have to say, it is gray. I'm not even sure what shade of gray it is. So we're going to have to sort this out. And then a tremendous amount of decentralization. And when I say that, you've got to give young subordinate leaders as much guidance as you can, but then you got to let them make decisions. They're going to make mistakes, but you would too if you made it yourself. So you decentralize it, you support them, you keep guiding them, much more than we ever had to in the past. I think much more than we ever had to in the past. And again, you'll get a tremendous amount of positive from that, because when you give somebody a lot of freedom, they own the problem to a much greater degree. I always tell people that, you know, if I told you to go out there and dig a 6-foot ditch, 6 feet deep, 6 foot long, you know, 6 foot long, 2 feet wide, and I didn't tell you why, you'd go out there, you know, okay, you do it. But if I told you, no, you know, we're actually going to kill this guy, and you're going to bury him out there, and you don't like that guy, you go, hey, great, let's go out there and get him done. And if you give mission orders, they dig it 3 feet long, cut the dude in half, chuck it in there, and problem solved. But that's what I found works now. Thanks.
Go ahead. Hi, my name is Jawan Phillips. I'm a student here at Widener. I study political science. How did you interact with all the different intelligence agencies and the intel they gave you? Because I know sometimes they can clash. And what do you do if you're on the ground? I mean, how do you react to things like that?
That's a great question. You know, we have multiple intel agencies for a reason. I don't know if it's a good reason, but one of the reasons is so that you get different views of something. If you had a single intelligence agency that's reporting everything, you really be hamstrung. It's like having one newspaper in a city. And the danger is they start showing one editorial bias. So one of the things I used was, I'd use multiple different sources to look at the same problem and ask them that. And then the second thing, and it took me a while to learn this, is somebody would tell you, here's our intelligence assessment. This is going to happen. I would start pulling threads. I'd say, why do you think that? They'll say, well, we have reporting. It says, show me the reporting. And I'd make them pull me through the logic that got them there. And two things happened. One, I started to learn and get better at that. And you start asking those kinds of questions. The second is the more you do it, you add rigor to their process. You will find that if they get asked a number of times, they start doing more homework themselves. Some of them do it pretty well already, but sometimes you'll find you can get part of the picture, and you really need more of it. And then, of course, you can even say, I'm getting signals intelligence, I'm getting human intelligence and whatnot. Somebody give me some intelligence just from someone who's not collecting, meaning it's not from a spy or it's not from a signal intelligence. Give me information from someone, a journalist who's just in the area. Because sometimes you'll find that the intel people get very focused on secret stuff, and in reality, the journalist will go, you know, you got a forest out there, and you're looking at the bark on trees. And it's extraordinarily helpful to sort of triangulate those. That's great. Sir?
Yeah, I'm Art Holt. My wife actually teaches here. Would you care to comment on the current and future role of special forces in the military?
Sure. I will, within the military, the term special forces is the Army Green Berets. And I know it's a little confusing. Special operations forces is the SEALs, all the different forces, and I'll talk about those. We are in a I spent most of my career in special operations forces, so obviously a little bit biased. But we are in a danger point right now. They are everybody's darling. And the problem with everybody's darling is, I can tell a quick story. My wife is not a golfer, but we went playing with the charity golf tournaments with John and Kathy Abizig. And so Annie uses a big driver my father had made for her. I'm not a golfer either, but I tried to make one. And she hit a shot with a big driver that went straight. And the rest of the day, that's the only club she used. She putted with the darn thing. We run the risk of that's the club you use. And the danger of that is special operations seems like the easy fix. It's small, it's discreet. Even though they say high risk, it typically tends to work out. It's less expensive, and so everybody says, well, we won't do a big op, we'll do a surgical op. And then I try to remind them, have you ever had surgery? You cut the skin, there's scar tissue, there's infection, it hurts like hell. So don't mistake this for being easy. It's a tool appropriate for certain circumstances, but if you start thinking it's the fix for everything, it's like drones. Drones are good for some things, but they're not good for everything. And so if we start being a special operations forces centric or dependent force or strategy, I think we'll be very unhappy. We'll start using when it doesn't work, and then we'll go, they're no good. That's just because we don't think enough. There is no easy solution. And so in my view, now, one thing special operations forces can do is they can engage in countries where you're not at war very, very well. And they can help build those relationships and understanding that it's not. Thanks. Sir.
My name is Christopher O, and I'm a current student here at Widener University as well.
What do you study, Christopher?
I'm sorry?
What do you study?
I'm currently studying political science. You talked earlier about the importance of winning hearts and minds in Afghanistan rather than full-scale military operations. In your opinion, what is the most effective way to do that?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that, because sometimes people say we've got to win the hearts and minds. What we're going to go in there is go in there with an ice cream machine and we're going to be nice to everybody. That's really not how it works. Counterinsurgency is a very cold-blooded, and I say that not pejoratively, it's a very cold-blooded strategy. If you want somebody to do something, it's an argument between the insurgents and the government, and you're trying to win the argument by making it clear to the people that it is their interest. What we found is until you establish security in an area, you can't hope to win the hearts and minds. Most people think, well, you win the hearts and minds, you get security. That's not the way it works. You establish security and you show that you're willing and able to protect the population and offer them some opportunities. Then suddenly they will start to say, okay, this makes sense, I can support that government. The people don't support who they want to support, they support who they think they must support. That's a pretty interesting difference. They may like the Taliban, or they may like their government, they may like us, but if we couldn't provide security and the Taliban were still able to get in once a week or once a month and threaten them, they're not going to support us because it's suicidal. They'll get killed. So what they do is they make very rational decisions of what they can do. And what you've got to do is give them enough security and opportunity for them to be able to choose the government. And that's really how it works, and that's where the hearts and minds come from. Again, it sounds too much like a popularity contest in that phrase. That's why I think a lot of people get mistaken. Thanks, Christopher.
You've indicated that you have been, my name is Mary Shorter, by the way, I'm also a poli-sci teacher. You've indicated that you've been in the military over 3 decades. Have you seen a change in worldview as they respond to the U.S., and how has that changed?
Yeah, that's great, Mary. It's worse. We are not viewed, it's gone up and down. But the reality is the popularity of the United States and support for our policies has gone down. We don't have the same sort of automatic credibility and gravitas that we did even in the 70s when I entered, even on the heels of Vietnam. And that hurt us some. And I think that's for several reasons. One is natural. The world is getting a little bit more multipolar again. It was an aberrational thing for the United States to be so powerful, economically and politically and whatnot. So it's going back to a more multipolar world, and that's good. But at the same time, we have got to communicate and engage around the world in a way that causes people to understand what we're trying to do. There's always going to be a little bit of resentment. If you've got, there's always sometimes going to be a lot. If you've got more money and power, even if it's relative, there's a certain number of people that just are going to resent you. And so we shouldn't worry about some of that. But in Pakistan, we have a lower approval rating than India. Think about that. Now, and we give Pakistan billions of dollars a year. Now, is that our fault, their fault, whatever? I'm not going to argue that. I don't know. But I spent a lot of time in Pakistan, but we ought to understand what's happening there. And it's hugely important. And so the way in which the American military engages should be something, or try to be something, that makes us stronger, meaning increases our credibility in relationships. We operate very responsibly when we operate. I mean, we get a lot of negatives, but certain things cost us, and they're aberrations. Abu Ghraib set us back extraordinarily because it fit the preconceived misperceptions of a lot of people in the region. They said, well, that's what the Americans do. Well, that's not what we do. There was photographic evidence that one group of Americans was misbehaving in a pretty extreme way. And that filled the airwaves and the internet, and it convinced a whole bunch of people, yep, what I'd heard was true. And we don't engage enough for people to know what they heard wasn't true. We found the best thing we can do is the more we engage with people, the more they come to this conclusion. You're not as bad as we thought you were. So pretty interesting. We can make it better, though. We can pay attention to make it better. Sir?
This is our last question.
How difficult is for a fourth-general starting service active to have an open opinion about what is going on in the government, especially for the chief of command of the president of the United States? And I'm asking you the question because I'm surprised nobody asked you the question about the interview.
Which one's that? Okay. It's impossible not to have opinions about, at any rank, whether you're a private or you're a four-star general, and you're expected to have opinions. And you vote, you take part in the political process. But just like if you're in any organization, you've also got to balance that with the responsibility of the job you're doing, loyalty, and all those other things. So what I would take is, what I found when I got very, very senior is a number of things happen. One, you have a responsibility to communicate more, even if you don't want to. I spent years in special operations where I didn't have to do that. And so when I was at the 4-star level at ISAF, I had to communicate because I had to explain the war in Afghanistan to the Europeans and to other people who were supporting it, because I commanded them as well, and to Americans. And no one else was in my particularly unique position to articulate at least the military part. So I had to do that. So at the same time you are communicating that, you're trying to make sure you do it in a way that represents what you really feel. You can't get up there and just spout some line. But at the same time, you're trying to do it in a way that's also very, very responsible. And in today's media environment, that can be hard. It's not impossible, it's just hard. Because everybody's looking for an angle, they're looking for a word, they're looking for a political guy, I don't know who said it, said, you know, it's like an Etch-a-Sketch. Suddenly people grab any word or anything, and so it becomes. So it's just something that takes extraordinary skill and a little bit of luck.
Thank you, General.
Thank you very much, I appreciate it.